to the May meeting of the Southampton Village Planning Commission. Have two or three items we want to talk about tonight. And the first one is parking regulations in the smaller zones. So we had a discussion at the public meeting last month about parking and some of the issues we've all seen. You know, I think the impact is that we've all seen on many of the village streets is that houses are being built with an assumption that parking can be stacked. And in fact, parking doesn't occur that way on those streets. People do not stack in their driveways. And so what has been happening in real life is suddenly seeing many cars on village streets overnight, which we had never seen before. And some streets, such as Woolley Street, you see that in great amounts. Secondly, and let me go into a minute how we define it now and how we might change it. People are filing based on bedrooms that are counted on the first and second floors, but in reality, people are using cellars and attic areas for the living, and as a result, you have what is defined as, for example, a 4-bedroom house, but is in reality a 6-bedroom house. So even if you were providing sufficient parking to meet the code, you actually don't have sufficient parking because the house is bigger. So we've been looking at the various mechanisms that could be used to solve that issue. And I think, and we should talk about it, my bias would be not to rewrite the entire parking code, because there's a lot of reasons it's worded the way it is now. And we did, one of the things we did do when we redid the zoning, I guess about 8 years ago, is we really wanted people to create detached garages and driveways, as opposed to doing parking in the front yard, which I think is not really the historic pattern in Southampton, except on very large lots. And we also didn't want people to attach a garage because it broke down the bulk of the house to have the garage separate. So what I'd like to talk about is on the parking issues are two things we might do. Number one, to add to the current regulations of parking in the zoning code, a provision that every spot to be counted for the zoning count must have direct access to the street. So you would not be able to count a spot, for example, in front of the garage, because that's blocking a spot in the garage. You'd not be able to count spots on the driveway that stack in back of each other. And so to be counted from a zoning point of view, you would have to, each spot would have to have direct access, which is a fairly typical provision in many villages, but not one we have right now. And then the second concept would be to require that the building department use the Suffolk County Health Department definition of bedrooms, which is significantly more inclusive than the definition we now have. So for example, if you had space in the cellar that was quote unquote habitable, from a Suffolk County point of view, that would be counted, even though our current zoning does not count that as a bedroom if you don't call it a bedroom on your plan. So those are two things that I think would be fairly simple to add to the current zoning.
Do they do the same with attics?
Same thing with the attic. If you do the things that make it habitable, then it's counted from the county's point of view. The county would call it a bedroom. What's nice about this then is you have a outside impartial body deciding what's a bedroom, as opposed to the building inspector trying to read the code and interpret what is a bedroom and what isn't. So wanted to throw those two things out as a proposal and see what people on the planning commission or the audience thought.
Yeah, I think that.
I think that that's reasonable.
Right.
So, yeah, let's go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the definition of bedroom, according to the health
Right.
department, is a very, very good idea. To have each spot have a direct access to the street is going to be difficult to achieve. I think that maybe, half of the spots have access to the street or something, but have each spot access to the street is.
So you would, the thought is that the spot has to be able to either back out or go forward into the street. You can't have to, the basic concept, and maybe there's a better way of wording it, is you wouldn't have to move another car to get to that spot.
I understand that.
Because the fact is, no one does that. No one in New York, there may be people on the West Coast do that, they stack cars. No one in New York does stacks cars, right? I mean, find a place in the village where people line up cars where they actually move them that way. They don't do that, and so what you see on your street, certainly on Old Town Crossing now, on Little Plains, on Lewis Street, on those streets is, so people have a driveway, they pack the car, this is how they actually use the driveways. They put the car in the driveway that they can get out easily, and any other car they just put in the street, right?
Yeah.
And unless,
Yeah,
right.
There might have to be some forbearance on side setbacks for driveways, or,
So people aren't parking right.
Right.
yeah.
I think that maybe we could also add some parking regulations. Such as not alternate side of the street parking, or at least they're all parked on the same side, such that you don't.
But that's not a zoning provision. Those are parking regulations. In other words, what we can do in the zoning is affect, and what this is really doing is affecting people's ability to build a house that has more bedrooms than any of us ever contemplated, because they're really not providing the parking that's required for a house with that many bedrooms.
Right, no,
and that's really the impact from a zoning point of view.
Because another possibility would also to allow residents to create a parking space within the right-of-way, where you could create another little parking space in the street where you can park in. In some areas, it's like on John Street, there's one house that created a little space where you can park. It's like just adjacent, it's between the right-of-way and the property line.
Well, on the easement
In other words, it's an easement in the front yard in effect, but that's really allowing front yard parking.
there. Yeah.
And people can do a variance. Look, we're not stopping anyone from going and getting a variance.
Right.
This is what's in the code. And from my own point of view, if someone wants to get a variance, because maybe like a John Street, that they think there's an area in the front that they could provide, let them go and get the ZBA to give them a variance for that. But that shouldn't be something that you would count on, because every lot's going to be different. If, for example, you took the lot next to me and said they could park in the front, that would be pretty awful for me, right? And then not being John Street. So that's a variance issue, it seems to me, as opposed to saying.
Especially now,
Right.
front yard parking has to be screened.
Right.
It's like more like an expansion of the street parking.
Right, but on John
Very narrow
right.
street.
But if you took
Very narrow streets.
right, but what that means in effect is you have less landscaped area.
Right.
Right. I mean, think of Little Plains. If you did that, then every lawn would get smaller. And the worst part of it is people are building these huge driveways. If you look at the new houses that have been built, they're building very large driveways, but they're not, since they really can't park the number of cars that are in their bedrooms, the cars are ending up in the street anyway. So if you take if you look at the new houses that have been built and you see what's actually going on in parking, people are parking exactly the way I said. They're parking the driveway, those spots that they can get directly at, and everybody else ends up in the street. Because they're not going to stack. So, comments from the audience at all, or any thoughts?
I think it's great if you can do it. Because the real problem is that there's too much on a lot.
Right.
So if you can somehow reduce that, that would solve every problem practically for a minute.
For a minute, right.
But it's a useful problem.
Jay?
I was looking at this with some others, and we sort of came back thinking maybe instead of judging bedrooms, judge bathrooms.
Right.
And give people 3.5 baths, and any bathroom over that, you need an additional parking space, because that's a very, it's pretty hard to say, gee, that closet has a faucet and drainage and a shower head, so it's not really a bathroom, it's a closet. You can't do that. I mean, you've got plumbing.
Right.
And if you put it in the basement,
Right.
then you've got a bathroom in the basement. I mean, I think most people, what we're seeing is if they're putting 2 bedrooms in the basement, they have 1 or 2 baths down in the
Right,
basement. And so that might be a way to
Right.
also, not have to necessarily
Mhm.
change the
Right.
definition. I also was thinking, right now we require 10-foot setback, maybe narrow that to just 5 feet.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I am very worried about now playing around with setback rules that
Yeah.
have many
Yeah.
reasons they exist beyond just parking. So,
I just think
and I
some
don't see
garages that are-
physically, I guess the other comment I would make is, I don't see physically that anyone's having problems fitting in a large driveway. That's not what's causing the parking in the street.
Well, I think the setback component
Right.
is that the garage can be set back 5 feet from
5
the
feet,
property
right,
line.
right,
But the
And
driveway.
but the parking has to be 10 feet.
right.
So from a consistency standpoint,
Right.
like John Foster said, it would be a good recommendation to go to the 5 foot instead of,
Right,
because, historically, the detached garage was always in the back corner.
right, right.
And now people are
Right.
pulling it up and.
Right. The only countervailing thing to that is the 10 feet. The reason we did 10, because we were aware that it
Right.
was different than the garage,
Yeah,
was to create more of a landscape buffer.
okay.
And in fact, for example, you're not allowed, there's many things in the village, you're not allowed to put in the 10 feet between houses. So 10 feet, the reason we picked the 10 was to make it the same as the other things that you can't put in. So you had at least 10 feet of buffer between you and the house next door in terms of having landscape as opposed to a vehicle. So that's the impact. The impact of the 5 feet is, if you're in the house next door, particularly because that driveway, from a zoning point of view, can go right by your house.
Yeah,
So if you have a flag lot, for example,
it's true.
and it's 5 feet, that means that car is now within 5 feet of your house, as opposed to 10 feet. That was the reason for the difference. So,
I think on like our street, the narrow lots, 5 feet is really pushing it. It's too narrow.
mhm,
Because people have taken the opportunity,
right,
there's a lot of driveways that are being blocked and going straight back right by the houses.
right.
And I think 10 feet isn't that many feet. 5 feet is ridiculous. 5 feet is like from here to here, I'm 5 feet tall. That's not enough.
5 feet does occur in some other places, but we have such a history and so many streets where you have flag lots, that we thought the 10 feet had made sure that, and people tend to divide up lots in our village. That happens a lot. So we thought that the reason we had put the 10 feet in originally was so that at least you knew that you didn't have that all the way along, as opposed to letting the garage be bigger, in effect, to create spots for 2 cars as opposed to 1. Okay, so why don't we think a little more about it, but I do want to move this. So, and Jay, you might want to look at the Suffolk County rules and see if you think that would work as an option. It's pretty simple, and then the building inspector would know what to do.
Because they do base the bedroom, definition of the bedroom on the proximity
To a bathroom.
to the bathroom.
Right,
So
right,
what can happen is,
right,
they could put a bathroom down in a basement and have 2 rooms, and they were gonna have 2 bedrooms.
right,
And then they claim, well, that's a storage room, and that's
Right.
whatever.
Right,
And,
an office.
which has happened.
Office in the gym,
right.
Yeah, an
right,
office in the gym.
with a double sink.
Right.
Right, right.
And so,
Right.
but Suffolk County would define those as 2
Right,
bedrooms, and there
right.
was no
Right.
ifs, ands, or buts about it, so.
Right.
How would they distinguish whether you have 1 or 2 or 3 bedrooms in the basement if you just have 1 bath?
It
Or
depends on the windows, the amount of
Right.
windows.
So
You
it's
have to
based,
have the egress window.
Correct.
so
If
each,
you have an egress window, you consider it as a building.
Right, right. It's actually stricter than we would probably if we tried to write code, but it's a pretty simple rule because you're saying whatever the county defines, that's what we're using. So, I think it might be a very simple way to, so why don't you take a look at it?
It's also
Yes.
used,
Yeah.
it's also
Yeah.
used throughout, the town uses it.
Right,
everybody
right,
uses it.
right.
It gives a certain uniformity.
Right.
and does the town, I don't know that they necessarily have it in their code in all cases, because I know like East Hampton, you know, basically they don't,
They don't.
they don't speak about it, but
Right.
yet they have been enforcing and creating parking very differently than we have.
Right.
So I'm just concerned that.
What East
that-
Hampton has basically been doing with parking is exactly what I said.
Yes.
Which is they've been saying, if that car can't get to the street, I'm not counting the spot. I would say our building department has not felt the code really allows them to do that currently. But that's what East Hampton's been doing. So if you went in East Hampton, you filed a plan, and you showed parking spots stacked, they would throw the plan out and make you redo it. So, I mean, in a non-urban setting, the concept that people are gonna stack cars, I think, just is not accurate. It's just not what people would. In an urban setting, people will do that because spots are so, are such a premium. People may not want to put their car on the street, so there's lots of reasons in that context. People will stack cars, but here, particularly, on our street, for example, the street's very wide, so why wouldn't someone park a car on the street, right? So if someone on my street decided they were going to build a 6-bedroom house and they really had a garage, a driveway that accommodated in reality 3 cars, those cars are going to end up, they're clearly going to end up on the street because it's a wide street, they clearly could do it. But that's going to change the nature of the way that street looks and works. And I think that's what we've been hearing a lot of, people feeling that's really changing
I hate how it looks.
the feel of the streets. Traditionally we had here, which were, at least semi-rural, so. Okay, so why don't we all think about it, I'd like to move this. Okay, so just related to this, in a way, because we're talking about the smaller zones, I would just want to bring up another issue that I think we need to take a look at. So when we redid the zoning for the smaller zones several years ago, there were many different provisions which we thought working together would ameliorate some of the worst things we were seeing at the time. And to some extent that has happened, but what I don't think we fully contemplated was that that basically virtually every house that would file would go for the full height. So it's almost impossible to find a house that's filed that doesn't ask for the maximum height that was permitted, which we thought would be the exception, not the rule. But it's turned into the rule, not the exception, for whatever reason, for various reasons. So, so what we're seeing is basically almost every house trying to build to 35 feet. And I think as we see that spreading, that's having real issues, because they seem out of scale, as opposed to what we thought would be just a small number of houses going to that, and the rest of them between the pyramid law and other provisions being much shorter. So I think the question I'd like to reopen, if you will, 8 years later, is whether we need to relook at heights in the small zones and think about, particularly on the smaller lots, whether we need to bring some of the heights down, so that it's more what we thought originally was going to happen. And otherwise, obviously, it would also bring us closer to compliance with what other villages in the East End have done in the smaller zones. So, obviously, I know many people have raised this issue, and I think when you look at it, it's hard to find a new house that's not doing that.
I just drove by one today and went,
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I've been watching I have a very boring life, so I've been watching the videos of the ARB meetings. And it's very interesting actually, because what you see is one house after another, basically they're all the same. They're all building to the maximum envelope almost without exception,
Yeah,
so,
it's there.
I don't know, any thoughts, comments?
I'd like to revisit that.
Yeah, Mark?
I'm not so sure that, I mean, I think it is sort of part of the village and our
Right.
regulations, and that's a pretty fundamental issue to revisit.
Right, right.
I mean, we can revisit, but I'm not
Right.
sure that we,
I'm not saying I've made up
We're
my
just
mind,
thinking
or any of us have made up our
about it.
minds, it's just that's something we need to study to see if we're satisfied it still is
you know.
doing what we intended it to do.
Yeah.
Or maybe reinforce that, try to review the criteria that have been presented in front of the ZBA as to when have they been granting variances
Right.
for the height and whether they should.
They're not granting variances on
Well,
height.
yeah,
there's
they're
some,
They're not granting height
Yeah, they're
variances.
really not. And no one's asking because everyone's going, can go to 35
You don't
feet.
need to.
Right.
there's
Yeah, you
some
don't-
houses
yeah,
that are
right.
above 35.
Is that?
A few houses are more than 35 feet.
Or just the
No.
FEMA, just the FEMA, nothing.
Yeah.
No, not in FEMA.
Where?
Where?
I think on Halsey Street.
No.
So that's just how it looks when you
Yeah.
hear that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
It looks
35 feet.
wrong.
yeah, that.
I don't know, I mean, I'll check, I don't know a case where the ZBA has given a variance on
They
height.
haven't given a height variance.
They have not given
They've got
height.
the other
No.
thing going on.
Yeah.
Right.
The
Over
only,
there.
the only height variances that have been issued are coming from the village board in reference to the moratorium.
Right,
So I support what
And
you're
that's
doing
the
and
FEMA
looking at
side.
heights 100%.
right.
Okay.
Make the smaller lots, these 35-foot
Right.
house now, because people are building out the envelope. and
Maybe we
it's-
should look into
Right.
that. It looks to me, a few houses look to me higher than
But
35 feet.
that's what happens. I mean, you're looking at probably the same houses that we're looking at, and you realize that you can't, you
Right.
just.
35 feet is high, and when you put it on a third of an acre, it's really a lot.
Yeah.
Right,
So
And
that's
then-
what
And then
happens.
apply the pyramid.
Yep,
right, right. And because the pyramid sort of forces you to go to get to that height, you have to go to
To go
the,
max.
you have to go to the top.
Right.
Right, right.
And you flatten the roof.
You flatten, right, and you,
And you
right,
can see
that's the other
from
way
there.
people have been doing it, they flatten the roof to get to the height.
Yeah,
Is-
to get that.
has
third
there
one.
been, in the recent decision, the roof, how the pitched roof is described? Or the law doesn't seem specific enough also?
You know, I'm not sure of that, honestly. I read through the code afterwards,
But
but we don't require a pitched roof currently. It's not, I don't think it's not that it's not correctly defined, it's that there's actually not a requirement currently to
But
do
aren't there
pitched roof.
different, like, on these beach houses, or I forget what the ruling is?
Well, in the beach houses, so it's under, the difference
Yes.
really is, in the beach houses, we currently have no pyramid, no provision. You can basically do whatever you want within the square footage. So
But
there's
isn't there-
no,
There's no 28 and 35?
not in the, no, not
In the estate section.
currently.
How come?
Because when we did the revision of the zoning code, it was only in the smaller lots. That's obviously one of the things that's been proposed.
Well,
in
you're
FEMA
talking,
zone.
you're talking about, there is a height restriction throughout the village, so.
Right,
35
right,
feet.
is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's what I
There
think.
seemed to be a
you're talking-
problem in defining at 40 Meadow Lane what a pitched roof was. That it was very clear in the decision. I'll send
Right.
you the paper.
Okay,
Okay.
I think an example of that too is over on Wickapog. There's a house going up on the north side.
north side of the street, yes.
And what they've done is there's a probably 20-foot wide by 30-foot long section where it's a flat roof, I believe.
Yeah.
But they've peaked up to it.
Right,
And if they had gone up with the continuation of the roof, they
Right.
would have pierced the 35 feet.
correct, correct.
And that to me is something we would want to avoid, because I think
Okay.
what we will end up with is, these essentially kind of mansard style roofs
Mhm.
all over, which I don't think are really the
Right.
tradition here. No one will do
Right.
a true peaked roof, because if you flatten it out, you can get wonderful living space.
You know what's interesting is in the business district of all things, because we were much more careful about the form, you're actually not allowed to do that.
You're not?
You're not, you have to break the roof. You have to. You cannot create a roof all the way across. You have to break it.
So,
So it might be that we just apply that provision throughout, might be an easy way of solving it.
Mhm.
So in that case, so in the business district, because we obviously contemplate eventually, hopefully, we'll get 2- and 3-story buildings and housing above. What we provided, because we were allowing that to happen, was if you had, when you had your roof going up, you had to break it, you had a maximum, I'm trying to remember the length. There's a maximum length you could go before you would break, before you had to break the roof.
I think 60 feet, right?
Yeah, and so
I think you're right.
you couldn't have an endless flat roof because you would have to go like that to deal with exactly that issue. So it might be, it's an interesting thought, maybe we just use that and say, you know, we can expand that provision. So at least in your case, I know exactly the house you're talking about on Wickapog, that house, you'd have to split the roof up, which would really change its nature, which would very much encourage you to do much more of a traditional pitched roof, because you wouldn't be able to get that endless length of roof.
And I think from a
Right.
homeowner's
Yeah.
viewpoint, we also should, I don't think, be apologetic, because since the code was written, everybody essentially has gotten a bonus basement. 10 years ago, basements were not really, the technology was not there for basements to be livable the way they
I
are
was to
today.
say, it's not a zoning issue, it's a,
And so I think
Right,
we should,
right,
in a way, if
right.
that can be
Right.
underground and they can put a bedroom and
Right.
some living space down there and then
Right.
reduce the
Right.
mass of the house
right,
so that we can preserve neighborhoods,
right.
we should encourage that. But at the same time, I don't think they should get it on both ends. I mean, you know, this is why we're getting houses that are 5,500 square feet of living space, not from a ARB or a zoning viewpoint, but the actual living space is 5,500 square feet on a third of an acre with a pool house, detached garage, and a pool.
Right. But I think, Jay, the reason people are doing that is because, I mean, certainly number one, you're right, the technology now makes it possible, but the other thing is, because in reality, what they're thinking is at some point, if they're gonna rent the house and they have a cellar that now is habitable, they can rent it, obviously, with more bedrooms than we're looking at right now from a zoning point of view. So I think if we adopt the county rule, they would, in effect, they're gonna pay the penalty up front. So if you wanna do that you can, we're not gonna stop you from doing that, but now you have to provide the parking as if that was a bedroom, and if you can't fit those parking spots on your lot, you can't get those many bedrooms. Which is, by the way, is what we thought originally. We didn't realize how they were gonna apply the parking rules. So when we did this 8 years ago, we really thought that the bedrooms would basically make it, was one of the reasons why we thought people would not be filling out their envelopes, because they couldn't get enough parking to put the bedrooms on. What we didn't realize, the way people would get around it, in effect, was to, put bedrooms on other than the first and second floor. So, it's a way of a cleanup, really, from what we originally did, I think. But, okay. Any other thoughts about?
Measure height from the basement.
Well, I don't think so much that as much as, I think one thing, we looked at in the FEMA zone, and I think might apply throughout the village, is being much more careful about how we look at grade. Which is one of the things that when they looked at what was going on in the FEMA zone, but I don't think it's in any way limited to the FEMA zone, in that there's a lot of fill going on, which raises your grade. And so I think some houses that you think look more than 35, that basically raise the grade, and they're getting another foot or two that way. And all that stuff,
It's possible.
all that stuff adds up. It's a one-way. Again, you're making it look higher than it would be otherwise. Yeah.
So we could apply that issue to the smaller lots.
Right, to all the lots.
Well, one aspect also is that right now, anything that's below grade has no side yards.
Right.
So I think maybe we should look at also having a side yard for at below grade level, even if it's a 5 or 10 foot side yard.
But do you think people are doing that?
Yeah,
Pushing it behind the house?
creating the areaways and
Interesting.
all the way to the lot line.
Uh-huh. Huh. Okay. Okay, so FEMA, I think you wanted to just report where we are on that. So, obviously the report came out in March, and in response to comments we got from the public, we've asked Nelson Pope to look at the impact, let me see if I can say this in the most accurate way, the impact of if we apply purely the new pyramid law in the FEMA zone, and perhaps the height limits that have been proposed, versus applying the FEMA zone, the height limits, and all the other rules as to side yards and front yards. So I guess it's to look at, I guess another way of saying it is to look at whether just applying the pyramid and overall height limit would do enough that we would basically address the issues.
And that would address the smaller lot?
No, this is in the FEMA zone,
Right, I know.
in the FEMA zone. Yes, in the narrow lots and the
Okay,
wider lots.
okay.
So, so we can reach some consensus on these issues. Right,
We're gonna get pictures.
right, we're gonna get pictures,
It's
right.
always good.
Right, which I think will be good, actually, is to, and bring them to the next meeting and look at this is what it looks like under either.
In terms
Scenario.
of timing, when do you think we?
As fast as they can do it, if necessary, maybe we'll have another meeting and allow people to take a look at it. So maybe if they're ready in 2 weeks, maybe we'll do another meeting and I'll take a look at them and see if
Make a
they.
recommendation to the.
Yeah,
And the small lot thing, if you don't get going on that, it's gonna be too late.
right, I agree with you. So I-
Honestly, the
yeah.
people on the beach, it's sort of ruined already, but there might be a neighborhood left if you could.
People on the beach may not agree with that.
I don't
but
care.
others may.
No, but they're.
I certainly think, I agree with you, the parking is a very urgent
It's
issue.
gangbusters out there every minute.
Yeah.
Your neighborhood, my daughter lives on Willie Street, it's just,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable.
Right.
Yeah,
And if it were stopped now, I don't think it would be desperate, but it's close.
right. And we certainly see what's going on Old Town Crossing now. and-
Yeah.
Two more lots were
Yeah.
cleared on Post Lane,
Right, right.
No.
so.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
Those are my favorite little streets.
Yeah.
Cute little.
So why don't we think about it, and we should talk, and I'd like
Yes.
to move forward to make a recommendation to the trustees on the parking.
Okay, very
Yes,
good.
Great.
I second it, yeah.
Okay.
On the FEMA, what kind of timing? are you
So
looking at?
I think, I'm hoping they'll be able to do this in the next 2 weeks, and then we'll, assuming that they can, and hopefully I'll hear back tomorrow, then I think we'll call a special meeting so we can all look at the drawings,
Okay,
think
very
about them, and see,
Make a
because I know we
recommendation.
want
I
to
think that once we
bring the
get,
moratorium to a close so that we can move
well,
on.
once we get them, we should post them right away.
Yeah, we'll post them on the village website so everyone can see.
And, yeah.
Right.
Does the parking have to be done as a zoning change, or can that be a directive to the building
I
department?
think it's a zoning change.
Well,
It's a revision anyway.
Yeah.
I would want to codify it,
Right,
because then there's no, if you go speak to the 3 building inspectors, there's 3 different interpretations.
right,
So we want it to be very,
right. Yeah. I also think it's not fair to the building department.
It's not.
Because
No,
it puts,
it
it puts them at risk.
right,
If someone challenges their right to do that, I think you want to put it into the code. And it's not, I think, if it's the provision I'm talking about, it's pretty
it's simple.
straightforward
It is very
language.
straightforward.
So it's basically a few additional sentences. So it should be fairly easy to write. So, I just, sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
I just want to mention the sewer map and plan we are working on. I think we were thinking, hopefully in July, we'll be able to come forward and have a public meeting and talk about it. But we are working away, and, when we did the village center zoning, we said that, that would allow things to happen, but when things really would happen is when the sewer map got done, and so hopefully in July we'll have something to show and put the second piece into place. So, any questions, comments,
I'm good.
audience?
I'm very happy the direction that we're moving here
Right.
with all this stuff.
Right.
And look forward to being able to present something in front of the Board of Trustees. yeah, we do have to,
Right.
we do have to take this.
Yeah.
I think we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, so I think we're gonna talk about the parking and
Right.
try to come up with a joint
Okay.
recommendation, and you should look at the county code and see what you think. I think it's a very easy way to handle it, and I very much like the idea it's a third party. So it's not subject to the pressure that we're all subject to in the village.
This provision also addresses direct access?
Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you, and we're concluding the meeting.